Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study through the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are currently in Exodus. We're going to try to get to chapters 11 and 12 today, and this is going to be the final blow to Egypt, the firstborn. All right, let's get into it. Chapter 11. All right, so verse 11, the Lord said to Moses, I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go from here. And when he lets you go, he will drive you out of here. Now, God says, this one he is going to let you go. This again, it's after all of the plagues, he said, this one he's going to let you go. The death of the firstborn. Verse 2, now announce to the people that both men and women should ask their neighbor for silver and gold and jewelry. Now this is kind of interesting here when he says ask their neighbors for that, meaning the Egyptians. And later it's going to be called a plunder. You're going to get paid. Today we would even say reparations, which is amazing to me. A slight sidebar here, and I'm not going to linger on this, but with all of the discussions of reparations, and I'm talking about Christians now, I'm not talking about the world, but Christians, the hardness of many white evangelical Christians that would oppose reparations, and of course dismiss the justice of God. God here is getting them justice. In other words, 430 years of slavery. God says, you're owed something. But I'm not going to linger here long. All right. Verse 3, the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and the man Moses was highly regarded in the land of Egypt by Pharaoh's officials and people. In other words, the people began like, okay, Moses is man to God. Understand this, that this is also a testimony of God. Keep that in mind. This is a testimony of God to the world. Okay, to the world. Verse 4. So Moses said, this is what Yahweh says, about midnight I will go throughout Egypt, and every firstborn male in the land of Egypt will die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne to the firstborn of the servant girl who is behind the millstone, as well as every firstborn of the livestock. And this is something God just said, okay, we're going to, just to even add to it, the livestock, firstborn livestock. How do you know which one is the livestock? Well, the one that dies. The firstborn, that is. Verse 6. Then there will be a great cry of anguish throughout the land of Egypt, such as never was before or ever will be again. But against the Israelites, against all the Israelites, whether man or beast, not even a dog will snarl. So that you may know that Yahweh makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. All these officials of yours will come down to me and bow before me, saying, leave, you and all of the people who follow you. After that, I will leave. And he left Pharaoh's presence in fierce anger. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not listen to you, so that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. Now that's kind of interesting, because think about this. At this time, shouldn't have Moses listened? Shouldn't have Moses said, Pharaoh, shouldn't have Pharaoh listened? Shouldn't have all the Egyptians said, this is going to happen? Right? If you're sitting in your home and you hear that God of Egypt is going to kill the firstborn. You look at your firstborn son right there, or your firstborn daughter, and he says, ooh, tonight, But he says, notice, the hearts were hard. Verse 10, Moses and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go out of the land. Chapter 12, verse 1, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month is to be a beginning of months for you. It is the first month of your year. Now, he's going to say that this month is Abit, if I'm pronouncing that right, that they have a month. Now, this year is a 365-day cycle. I do wonder if it certainly began in January, what would correspond to our January. If you're going to look at the cycles, right? Spring, fall, winter and summer. I know I didn't say that in order, but anyway. Verse 3, tell the whole community of the Israelites that on the 10th day of this month, they must each select an animal of the flock according to their father's household, one animal per household. If the household is too small for a whole animal, that person and the neighbor nearest his house are to select one based on the combined number of people. You should apportion the animal according to what each person will eat. You must have an unblemished animal, a year-old male. You may take it from either the sheep or the goats. You are to keep it until the 14th day of the month. Then the whole assembly and community of Israel will slaughter the animals at twilight. They must take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and the lintel of the house where they eat them. They are to eat the meat that night, and they should eat it roasted over fire, along with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw, or cook in boiling water, but only roast it over a fire, its head as well as its legs and its inner organs. Okay. Do not let any of it remain until the morning. You must burn up any parts of it that does not remain before the morning. Here's how you must eat it. You must be dressed for travel, your sandals on your feet and your staff in your hand, and you are to eat it in a hurry. It is the Lord's Passover. So right here, the term Passover is instituted. They are to eat this meat, roast it. I kind of like this. I don't understand people when they like, raw meat, right? But notice God said, no. Cook that food. Okay, I digress. Verse 12, I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night and strike every firstborn male in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. I am Yahweh. I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt. Now, all of this, remember, this is what the Lord has been doing, bringing judgment against the gods of Egypt, as well as the sinfulness of Pharaoh, their evil that they did against the people. If you think about this in perspective, the time that the Israelites spent in Egypt, about 500 years, right? If we count the years of Joseph, so let's say around 500 years, 430 of them in slavery. So 500 years. And just so again, we keep this in perspective, remember how God saved this nation through through Israel, through Joseph, right? God prospered this nation through Joseph. And then they switch and enslave them. So keep that in mind. You know. All right. Verse 13. The blood on the house where you are stained will be a distinguishing mark for you. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. No plague will be among you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. This day is to be a memorial for you, and you must celebrate it as a festival to the Lord. You are to celebrate it throughout your generations as a permanent statute. You must eat unleavened bread for 7 days, and on the first day you must remove yeast from your house. Now the yeast the yeast represents a mixture. And you could say it probably even represented a corrupt kind of mixture. So the idea was they were to eat pure bread, not mixed with yeast. Verse 16. Verse 14 again. You must eat unleavened bread for 7 days. On the first day you must remove yeast from your houses. Whoever eats what is leavened from the first day through the 7th day must be cut off from Israel. He'll get more into these kind of commandments later on. You ought to hold a sacred assembly on the first day and another sacred assembly on the 7th day. No work may be done on those days except for preparing what needs to eat. You may only do that. Now, this is important here because this is going to be a real issue, working on the Sabbath day. What does it mean to work? Now, we're going to get into this later. He's going to really spell it out. But understand right here, it's important to understand. So what does he consider working? In other words, preparing a meal on the Sabbath day was okay. Okay? But notice he said no work is to be done. Now, he will get into that later. In other words, they wasn't supposed to gather sticks for a fire. It's certainly not to build and things like that, not work the fields. But notice he says you may prepare food, but a lot of the work that's involved in that, you're supposed to do that beforehand. Verse 17. We'll get more into that later when he starts giving out the law. And he's going to do it actually as the travels of Israel once they leave Egypt. We're going to see more and more, hear more and more about the different commandments of the law. Verse 17. You have to observe the festival of unleavened bread, because on this very day I brought your divisions out of the land of Egypt. You must observe this day throughout your generations as a permanent statute. In other words, Passover is a permanent holiday. Verse 18. You are to eat unleavened bread in the first month. And remember, this day was the first day of their first month of their first year of the Israelites, the nation of Israel. You are to eat unleavened bread in the first month, from the evening of the 14th day of the month until the evening of the 21st day. Yeast must not be found in your houses for 7 days. In other words, you can't even have it. If anyone eats something leavened, that person, whether a foreign resident or a native of the land, must be cut off from the community of Israel. Now again, we're going to get more into some of the commandments and some of the judgments of the commandments. Verse 20, do not eat anything leavened. Eat unleavened bread in all of your homes. So if you're confused, you shouldn't be, right? God is making it plain. No leavened bread. It must be unleavened. Verse 21, then Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, go select an animal from the flock according to your families and slaughter the Passover animal. Take a cluster of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and brush the lintels of the 2 doorposts with some of the blood in the basin. None of you must go out of the door of his house until morning. Okay. Verse 23, and when the Lord passes through to strike Egypt and seize the blood on the lintel and the two doorposts. He would pass over, hence Passover, right? He would pass over the door and not let the destroyer enter your house to strike you. Keep this commandment permanently as a statute for you and your descendants. When you enter the land that the Lord will give you as he promised, you are to observe this ritual. When your children ask you, what does this ritual mean to you? You are to reply, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, for he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians and spared our homes. So the people bowed down and worshiped, and the Israelites went and did this, and they did just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. Now here comes the death blow. Now at midnight, the Lord struck every firstborn male in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, to every firstborn of the livestock. During the night, Pharaoh got up, he along with all his officials and all the Egyptians. And there was a loud wailing throughout Egypt because there wasn't a house without someone dead. Now it's kind of interesting because that could have been even the parents themselves would have died if they were the firstborn. Verse 31. And he summoned Moses and Aaron during the night and said, get up, leave my people, both you and the Israelites, and go worship Yahweh as you have asked. Take even your flocks and your herds and all that you ask and leave. And also bless me. What the heck is that, right? He still hasn't learned. Okay. Verse 33, now the Egyptians pressured the people in order to send them quickly out of the country. For they said, we are all going to die. In other words, get these people out of here. Now there was another, actually, if you think about it, there was another way for them to just simply humble themselves before God. But they didn't. Verse 34. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, with their kneading bowls wrapped up in their clothes and on their shoulders. The Israelites acted on Moses' word and asked the Egyptians for silver and gold and jewelry and for clothing. And the Lord gave the people such favor in the Egyptian sight that they gave them whatever they requested. And in this way they plundered, think about this, they plundered Egypt, the Egyptians. So all of that labor, the 430 years labor, reparations. Okay. Verse 37, the Israelites traveled from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 soldiers on foot besides their families. An ethnically diverse crowd also went up with them, along with a huge number of livestock, both flocks and herd. Notice he said ethnically diverse, meaning there were different people other than Israelites. Now we'll get to that more because God's going to make He's going to make provisions for them. In other words, you did not have to be a naturally born or a descendant of Abraham only to be a part of God's house. But He also is going to give some regulations concerning them. We'll get to that later. The people baked dough. Verse 39. Well, let me read 38 again. An ethnically diverse crowd also went up with them, along with a huge number of livestock, both flocks and herds. The people baked the dough they had brought out of Egypt into unleavened loaves, since it had no yeast. For when they had been driven out of Egypt, they could not delay, and they had not prepared any provisions for themselves. In other words, let's go, move, and they started, hey. Verse 40, the time the Israelites lived in Egypt was 430 years. And at the end of 430 years, on that same day, all of the Lord's divisions went out of the land of Egypt. It was a night of vigil and honor of the Lord, because He would bring them out of the land of Egypt. This same night is the honor of the Lord, a night of vigil for the Israelites throughout their time. Now, this 430 years, I believe it is counted of when Jacob went down to Egypt, not Joseph. Okay, so when Jacob went down, that's when this 430 years time period started. Verse 43, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, this is the statute of the Passover. No foreigner may eat it. Now remember, when we talk about a foreigner, this is a foreigner who's visiting. The ethnically diverse people are not considered foreigners. We can also say they're proselytes. Verse 44, but any slave a man has purchased may eat it after you have circumcised him. So even if he was a slave, we'll get into the whole slavery issue later. But notice he said he was still supposed to be circumcised. Verse 45, a temporary resident or hired hand may not eat the Passover. In other words, just again, person passing through. Verse 46. Okay, it is to be eaten in one house. You may not take any of the meat outside the house, or you may not break any of its bones. The whole community of Israel must celebrate it. If a foreigner resides with you and wants to celebrate the Lord's Passover, every male in his household must be circumcised, and then he may participate. He will become like a native in the land. Now here again, we'll get more into these as he's talking here. Again, anyone could move to Israel and become a part of the nation if they're circumcised and then start following the law. The same law, verse 49, will apply to both the native and the foreigner who resides among you. And all of the Israelites did this. They did just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. On the same day, the Lord brought the Israelites out of the land of Egypt according to their divisions. So, and then we're going to see later that they marched out. In the presence, okay, while the Egyptians were burying their dead. Okay, all right. We will get into chapters 13 next time. Okay, guys, I'll see you then.